Welcome back to the London Futurists podcast. Peter James is one of the world's most successful crime writers. His Roy Grace series about a detective in Brighton, England, near where Peter lives, has produced a remarkable 19 consecutive Sunday Times #1 bestsellers. His legions of devoted fans await each new release eagerly. The books have been televised, with the third series of Grace, starring John Simm, being commissioned for next year. Peter has worked in other genres too, having written 36 novels altogether. When I first met Peter in the mid-1990s, his science fiction novel Host was generating rave reviews. It was the world's first electronically published novel, and a copy of its floppy disk is on display in the London Science Museum. Peter is also a confessed petrol-head with an enviable collection of classic cars and a pretty successful track record of racing some of them, so I dare say we'll talk about the likely arrival of self-driving cars during this episode. But perhaps we should start with mind uploading, which is the subject of Host. So Peter, welcome to the London Futurist podcast.
Thanks, Calum and David.
It's nice to see you, Peter.
Likewise, it's great to be talking about something I'm so passionate about as well.
So Peter, when you wrote Host, AI was just coming out of one of its winters, and it was almost a decade before the Big Bang in 2012, which ushered in deep learning. So what made you think about mind uploading back then?
Well, I read a book, I think it was written around about 1990, called Great Mambo Chicken and the Transhuman Condition. And every now and then you pick up a book in life and it has some kind of transformative effect on you. And the wide range of subjects in that book, from nanotechnology with nanorobots going into the bloodstream, it dealt with a whole range of issues that science fiction over the previous 100 years had sort of touched on a little bit. Incredible Journey and stuff. I've always had a fascination for computers. My mother's brother, younger brother, Joe Cates, was a Jewish refugee from Vienna and interned in the war in Canada. And when he was a teenager in an internment camp, he developed a computer to help blind people to see. And he was one of the pioneers of computer time sharing. And I'd had no interest in science at all at school. I got thrown out of biology O-level for eating a spring onion and asking for a second helping when I was meant to be dissecting that and the frog. But my uncle, when I went to live in Toronto in the early 70s, and he gave me my absolute love and fascination for computers. My best friend when I was at school at Jarhouse won a scholarship to MIT, and I spent Christmas 1970 at MIT. Marvin Minsky then was a professor of AI long before he became one of the great gurus. And one of his students had, just as a term paper, created a game of chess. It had about 20 moves, and a monkey could beat it blindfold. And I said to Minsky, how long before this thing's going to give a grandmaster a hard time? He said, Peter, let me explain why it couldn't happen. Firstly, we'd need a computer 10 times the size of this planet, and we'd need 10 to the power of 10 more people than there are on this planet to program it. And I love it when scientists get things wrong.
He had a bit of a track record of that, didn't he?
I just thought one day, the way artificial intelligence is going, obviously it's going to take a while, but if you could replace every cell in the human body one at a time with an artificial cell, there's an argument of which becomes the real me. Because 1 second after you've created your absolute clone, you're going to start being different people. But what if you literally downloaded a copy of yourself into a permanent storage? Maybe one day, long after you're dead, as we know it, you could be reanimated and have all that knowledge uploaded back into you. And that's where the idea for Host came from.
Yeah. So would you upload your mind if the technology became available tomorrow?
I'll tell you what I see as the problem right now. If my physical body was deteriorating, or I managed to wipe it out, well, most of it in a motor racing accident, which I nearly did in 2013, then it would be really useful to be able to upload your brain and boom, have a new body. Until we get that technology, my answer would be no. I went to Alcor, the cryonics organization, when they were at their Riverside, California base. And I was there when I was researching Host in about 1992, 93. And at that point, they had about 30 full bodies in those great big...
Those duos.
Yeah, the duos. And they had about another 30 heads just in small capsules. And at that time, you could pay $125,000 to have your whole body frozen or $50,000 just to have your head. And there were two problems that I foresee. Well, there were three problems. One is the technology at that point didn't work because in the process of freezing the body, you had to go through the freezing barrier, at which point a lot of the cells inside the blood and body would just explode like a milk bottle that you've left in a freezer.
Because of the ice crystals forming in them.
They were in the process of solving that through flash freezing, but they had the other problem was when they thaw them, the same thing, they hit the crystallization point. And so they hadn't sorted out the technology. That's not to say they wouldn't. But to me, there were two bigger problems. One is that under the laws of perpetuity, you can't leave money to yourself when you die. So if you did upload your body, had your body frozen, and at some point were reanimated, you ain't going to have any money.
Unless you have a friendly relative that you trust who could leave it back to you. You leave it to them and they leave it back to you.
Yeah, and would you trust that to be there in 200 years' time?
Good question.
That's one issue. The other issue with it is that I think if you could imagine that scientists, and I'm sure they will, find a way to bring back to life an Egyptian mummy, they'd probably bring about one or two out of interest, but not going to bring back all the mummies that are in the British Museum and elsewhere. And how would it be for the mummy suddenly stepping into a world that's 2,000-3,000 years different to what they know? So it'd be an interesting experiment. So I think at the moment, no, but I think we're going to move beyond that. What I think we're going to enter is into a period where death becomes something that no longer happens. I've heard it say that the first person to live to 200 has already been born. And I think the way modern medicine is going and replacing technology, I mean, I'm a type 2 diabetic. 100 years ago, I wouldn't be talking to you now. I'd have been dead for 40 years. We are being kept alive so much longer by modern technology. And I can foresee a time, probably not that far away, maybe a bit outside our lifetimes, but I hope not, where we all make backups of ourselves all the time. So if we get hit by a bus or go down in a plane or whatever, boom, we'd get reanimated with a new body.
Peter, are you ever likely to write another book on the subject of cryonics or mind uploading? The reason I ask is, as you're talking about issues with cryonics, I've got in my head the voices of the current Alcor staff who've got answers for all the questions you raise, things that they've worked out in the intervening years. So they're trust funds, so that you leave money for a trust fund, but you have enough other people watching it so that there's a reasonable chance that that long-lived organization is still around while you're reanimated. And then there's the whole thing of it's no longer freezing, it's vitrification. It's turning into a kind of glass in which the issues of ice crystals are hopefully largely dissolved. So I'm sure if you visited again, I think they're now in Scottsdale, Arizona, rather than California.
That's where I went to see them, yeah.
You would have a fascinating conversation with them.
I would very much like to. I know they moved there not long after I went, I think, because they were concerned about the earthquake risk in California.
Yeah.
I found them fascinating people. People love to sort of think that the whole concept of cryonics is flaky. These are not flaky people at all. There's some very smart people behind it. And yes, the answer, David, is very much I want to write another book on this subject. But I think we're probably going to move into post-biological man at some point. I wrote a novel called Perfect People, which I don't know if you read, about designer babies.
I hadn't read that one.
It's just been reissued. It came out originally about 10 years ago. It was shortlisted for the Wellcome Foundation Prize. It's a thriller, but it's about a couple who try to have a proper designer baby. One of the things I say in Perfect People is, why should we accept this long tyranny of life being 70 years and 10? I see the oldest woman alive died yesterday at 118 in France. There have been newspaper articles around that saying, is this a signal that we are expending our lives longer? And undoubtedly we are. I mean, the three of us, you two guys are not old by any means, but all three of us would probably not be alive statistically 100 years ago.
For sure. We had Aubrey de Grey on a few weeks ago.
Oh, did you? He's fascinating.
Fascinating and a lovely man. And he is now convinced that he can achieve robust mouse rejuvenation in 3 years, which will be proof of concept for longevity escape velocity for humans, which he thinks could happen in 15 years. So it may not be too late for us, Peter. You never know.
I'm very seriously hoping on that.
Also, we spoke to a chap called Andrew Steele, and his episode will be coming out shortly. And he made the fascinating observation that we shouldn't think of the number of years between now and longevity escape velocity. We should just think about the amount of money. And he estimates it at about $100 billion. So if somebody was to pump in $100 billion, then you could get to longevity escape velocity quite quickly. If you get even more successful, Peter, that's something that you might want to consider.
I'll certainly put money in. I mean, it's interesting. A lot of the California tech billionaires are putting huge money in. I think Jeff Bezos is putting money in, Elon Musk.
Well, actually, Musk isn't terribly taken with radical longevity. He doesn't put much stock in it. Larry Page is a big investor, and Larry Ellison as well, I think.
There's no question what we perceive as being human is going to change.
Yeah.
How about your book, Perfect People? I don't want to ask for too many spoilers, but is it a good news story or a bad news story? Because one thing that frustrates me a lot is that in a lot of fiction, the people who want to see humans live better end up being warped and immoral or selfish or egotistical, and the book pokes fun at them, and basically the moral is, let's just be natural. Whereas I think, on the contrary, we should be fighting nature, building on nature and doing much better than nature.
Which we're doing all the time. We have false teeth now. In the old days, people would starve to death if they had no teeth and couldn't eat meat. You're wearing glasses, Calum, I'm wearing glasses.
I've been lasered.
Right. Technology is completely taking over from natural selection. And in Perfect People, it's a mix of good news and bad news without any spoilers. Just to wind the clock back, I met a professor from Caltech in Pasadena at a party in Los Angeles in 2000. And he said, "Oh, you're a writer. You might be interested in what we're doing. We've just identified the genes responsible for empathy. Parents of the future are going to be able to choose the level of empathy of their child." I said, "Are you serious?" He said, "If you're really interested in this stuff, come and spend a day with us." So I went out to the campus at Pasadena about a couple of weeks later, and I was just astonished. There were these groups of genetic scientists working in silos, and one group said, "We're working on the genes responsible for ball game skills. Parents of the future are going to be able to choose whether they want their kid to be a good tennis player, a good golfer." And then another group were working on the human digestive system, saying that we're only going to need 10% of the food we currently eat to get a full balanced diet. Another group were working on the human sleep architecture, as they call it, saying that children of the future are only going to need 20 minutes to get a full night's sleep, so they'll have an active 20, 30 years more of useful working life. I just came away reeling, and I thought, this isn't some bunch of nutters. This is one of the major technology institutes on the planet, and they're doing this stuff. And it's going to happen, and that was what gave me the idea for writing Perfect People.
Interesting.
The great line in Perfect People, the line that I think is really important, it's basically two parents, couple, and they've lost a child through a rare genetic disease at the age of 4. They want a new kid that's going to be born without the genes for this disease. And they go on this converted liner in offshore waters off the coast of New York. And all they want is to have a healthy new kid. And the genetic scientist presents them with a list of 2,800 genetic options to tick, ranging from ball game skills, etc. And they say to him, "Look, all we want is a healthy child." He says to them, "If you don't, other people are ticking these boxes right now. Other people on this boat right now. If you do not tick them, you're condemning your child to be born into a genetic underclass." And that, I think, is what's going to happen in the future. Right now, we have a first world, second, third world divide. It's going to become even bigger as genetics advances.
We'll be right back after a quick break.
The People in Performance podcast offers insights into the strategic competencies, behaviors, and results needed to increase the performance of employees and leaders. The show looks at all areas of the world of work, including attraction and recruitment, onboarding, training, and succession planning. Tune in to get a better handle on the stages of workforce planning you need to master in order to guarantee long-term success in a rapidly changing world of work. New episodes drop each week. Check out the latest People and Performance episodes on your podcast platform of choice. Follow us on socials and read the latest articles at pppod.com.
Yeah, that'll be very interesting. Although, I mean, very often these technology divides turn out not to last. There is no fridge divide within the developed world, and there's not really that much of a smartphone divide either. Once a technology is demonstrably really, really useful, companies make so much more money by selling a cheap version to everybody than they do selling a diamond-encrusted version only to oligarchs and celebrities. But they do democratize. David, you talk about books with positive spins on all this. We do a very poor job of promoting our own books on this podcast. My book, Pandora's Brain, which is about uploading, that has a pretty positive message in it.
Pandora's Brain, great.
Yeah, which you very kindly gave me a very nice word or two for the blurb, Peter. Sounds to me like, Peter, you would identify yourself as a transhumanist. Is that a label you're comfortable with?
Yeah, I am. I think that we're at that point where we are moving forward, artificial limbs, opening doors by thought. We will be enhancing ourselves greatly with technology. I'm waiting for the day I can download the memory of having read a novel. In order to get through all the tens of thousands of books I want to read before I die. And the only way is going to be if I can instantly download them.
The alternative is to live longer and healthier and to be able to read faster. There are people who say that there are ways of reading faster, so we'd still have the experience. It wouldn't just be somehow mysteriously put at the back of our head and we remembered having the experience, we'd actually experience it as well. But there's just so many options, and that's what fascinates me. You talked about the lab where you visited, that people were doing so many things. It's unlikely they're all going to work. There will be issues and there will be complications, but surely there are so many things happening that the world can be very different and much better in so many ways in a relatively short period of time. And I think what distinguishes people who call themselves transhumanists from the rest is that we're ready to say, this could be very good. Let's hurry up at least some of it. And of course, let's think, let's avoid the issues you described when there might unexpectedly be a growing inequality. Let's consider these things through fiction, through philosophy, whatever. But on the whole, the possibilities are very positive. Is that your view as well?
Completely. I mean, people say to me, I wouldn't want to live to be 100. And I go, well, okay, but if you were 99, completely healthy, able to run 20 miles a week, and somebody says you're going to die tomorrow, or you have the choice to not die tomorrow and live to 200, which choice are you going to take? I think most people are going to choose to live to 200. When you take on board how life has changed, we haven't advanced biologically yet the same way we've advanced technologically and culturally. I mean, I think Aristotle was the last person physically capable of reading everything that had ever been written. And Copernicus was about the last person capable of reading everything written in his lifetime, in his own language. Today, the three of us, it would be impossible in our lifespans to even scratch the surface of everything that's been written.
Yeah.
So we need to live much longer to do that. I think part of the problem, part of the mess that we are in as a world, is that we don't live long enough to learn the lessons of the past. We only just reach some kind of maturity before most of us die. I think if we could live a lot longer, we would then take a lot more care of our planet, and we'd probably stop fighting over whose imaginary friend is better than the other.
Very wise words. Let's talk about technology and writers. Let's start with this. Have you been playing with ChatGPT? Have you found it at all useful in your work?
Do you know, I haven't really got into it. I've always looked at different technology to help writers. I guess I'm probably a little bit old school. The best birthday present I ever had in my life, in retrospect, was when I was 17. My dad bought me a little portable electric typewriter and a big ugly woman who stood over me, covered the keypads with sticky paper, and made me touch type. And if I looked down at the keypad, she'd hit my knuckles with a ruler.
That's old school.
It set me up in terrific stead. I touch type really fast. And I've tried all kinds of writing programs. I haven't got into chat, but I have looked at some of the AI programs. I think that the essence of writing fiction is the life experience of the writer. I can tell if I'm going to like a book by the end of the first sentence. It tells you so much. The birds were singing and it was a lovely day. Boom. But you take something like, it was midnight and the clocks were chiming 13. You're instantly there. Or start of Catch 22. It was love at first sight. The first time Yassarian saw the chaplain, he fell madly in love with him. A computer's not going to write that.
No. I had played with ChatGPT a bit, and what it's quite good at is writing short stories. I mean, the prose isn't deathless, not timeless, but it's not bad. And over a short period, it can do quite well. It's pretty rubbish at writing non-fiction. And I haven't tried it for longer fiction, but I'm sure it couldn't do that because it can't plan. But these are very early days.
You just cannot say never. Just like Marvin Minsky said to me back in 1970 that the computer's never going to beat a grandmaster. Was it Haldane who said not only is the future stranger than we think, it's stranger than we can think?
Yeah. And people forget that the smartphones in our pockets have more compute power than NASA had when they put Neil Armstrong on the moon. And in fact, that's way out of date because really now a good toaster has more compute power than that. And of course, that's from 1970 now. So where do we go in the next 10 or 20 years, given that we're on the exponential curve? The progress is only getting faster and faster.
I think that one place we're going to go is space. If we move into a transhuman state, then we can start to explore space. The fact that it's going to take 2,000 or 10,000 years to get somewhere is immaterial. If we can be in a more controllable body that can shut down for 100 years or 5,000 years while we travel to the other end of the known universe, those are the exciting areas. And we've explored so little of our world so far.
Yeah. So can we look forward to reading some space opera from you?
I was a great admirer of Carl Sagan. I loved Contact. But Sagan ultimately was negative about alien life. To me, there's no shadow of a doubt that there are many, many other civilizations out there. I've often thought that Earth is not our natural habitat. There were some very interesting experiments. Back in the late 60s, early 70s, there were a number of experiments done into the circadian cycle, that everything on this planet's on a 24-hour cycle. To be in a Darwinian advantage, you need to be on a 24-hour cycle. And they did experiments putting people down mine shafts. I don't know if you remember this.
Yeah.
For different periods, the longest was 6 months, and they had everything they needed, except they had no way of telling the time. And they had to keep a record of how long they thought they'd been down there. And every time, they reckoned it equated to a 25-and-a-half-hour day. And so that they're thinking, well, hang on a sec.
Where's that come from?
Yeah, where's that come from? Maybe we didn't come from this planet originally. Maybe we came from somewhere else. And we had to either evacuate it and find somewhere else that supported carbon-based life forms, or we were part of a colonization of space, and we found this place. I like this theory very much. Obviously, Darwinists try to shoot it down. Yeah, I think Darwin is an elegant theory for explaining how things evolve, but I don't think it's an elegant theory for explaining why we're here and having this conversation now.
I suppose panspermia could produce the same result if we are the result of an advanced civilization seeding life all around the universe. It might have sent seeds which would have been better off with 26-hour days. So if you think that, what's your explanation to Fermi's question as why we don't see any sign at all of intelligent civilizations out there in the universe?
Two answers. One is, will we actually recognize it? Could there be all kinds of stuff going on at the bottom of our oceans that we have no concept about? They're not necessarily going to be the same size as us. They could be all over our planet, smaller than the size of atoms, but perfectly formed. That we can't see. We might be ahead of other civilizations who haven't caught up with us yet. Or they've come and taken a look at us and thought, what a bunch of morons. We want to get involved with these people who are just fighting each other over bloody nothing. Yeah, I remember that wonderful quote. I can't remember if it was Neil Armstrong on the moon looking down at Earth. Little blue dot. And just saying how stunning it looks. And it's just horrific to think of all the ghastly stuff going on it that we don't need. I mean, I think that we just have no concept of how big the universe actually is. It could be that people just have not reached us yet.
There are so many fascinating mysteries of life, of science, of humanity and beyond humanity. That's one reason why I'm keen to hang around for another few decades, because I think there's a good chance that in the next few decades we're going to have incredible surprises. Just as people 200 years ago had no idea about the electromagnetic spectrum, which now runs our lives to such a large extent, no idea about the possibilities of nanotechnology, that so many things could happen down there, I'm sure there will be lots more surprises ahead. And personally, I want to be part of it, and I'm hoping that lots of other people can be part of it too.
Totally. I want to be there.
Yeah, there's a lot to see. We're sadly reaching the end of the conversation, but Peter, I can't help but ask you, are you looking forward to self-driving cars? I can't even imagine you hate the idea.
I love driving, but I have to say that driving on most public roads these days, you've got one eye in the back of your head looking on a camera and one eye in the forehead looking for cameras. I would actually love just to get in my car, curl up, read a book, and say, go to London, go to Birmingham, wherever. It would be great. I fear that it's a lot further away than we currently think. Getting back to my time at MIT, I think Marvin Minsky again, I think he said, by the year 1970, we would have replicated human consciousness in a computer and proved by definition God does not exist. Well, we're now in 2023, and we are a long way from it. I met by chance, I was at the Goodwood Festival of Speed last summer, and I sat next to the lady who is the Minister of Transport. And I asked her what her biggest problems were, and she said autonomous cars.
Really?
She said that's what's taking a lot of our worry up, because she said one of the big issues is who's in charge and where is going to be blame in an accident. There is the old argument, if you're driving in your autonomous car and it's driving itself and a lorry comes towards you on the wrong side of the road, you swerve right, you're going to kill 4 cyclists. You swerve left, you're going to kill a mother and her children. You go straight ahead, and the computer's going to save your life and not worry about the others. And that's a big issue that's not been resolved yet.
But actually, that sort of trolley problem question has been pretty widely, I don't know about debunked, because I suppose you can't debunk something that will come up in the future, but I don't think it's taken terribly seriously these days. What a self-driving car would do is just slam on the brakes as quickly as possible, and it won't be in a position to choose between the 1 nun and the 5 children. But it's interesting that you think it's a long way ahead. Obviously, you may well be right, but Google and Cruise have got self-driving taxis, nobody in the front seat, driving members of the public around in Phoenix and in San Francisco. Limited times of day and limited areas, but they've got proof of concept cars running around doing it, and they haven't caused any significant accidents yet. Clearly, it's a difficult problem, but it seems to me that it is happening, and the car companies who are still in that race are being extremely careful and conservative about how they roll them out, which is entirely right, because we don't mind being killed in the million by humans, but we will really get cross if a single robot kills 1 person.
Yep. I think it's much easier in an urban environment because you can have the massive network of cameras and computer hookups that you need to keep autonomous cars operating almost like a tram system. I think it's much harder out on the open road and the big wide spaces.
One of the themes of this whole series is exponential change. In other words, it takes a long time to get going, and many times we're frustrated. A technological breakthrough that's long been anticipated hasn't emerged. But then, over a relatively short period of time, things can come together when the technology powers ahead of what the limits previously were. So I think it's quite feasible that we may be frustrated for quite a few more years that self-driving cars isn't here. But then it may just be a short period of time, and starting in a few places, then they'll be everywhere. I actually think they will work on motorways, because motorways often have a lot of clear processes for driving. So maybe long-distance truck driving will be covered, and possibly some parts in the cities as well. And then, more quickly than people expect, I think there'll be a switchover. And then what you and I can do, if we want to drive, We can plug ourselves into a virtual reality machine and we can drive as fast as we like and more thrilling, and it can seem absolutely real, but if we do skid off the road, well, we won't actually be crushed to pieces as a result.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think there will come a time when we will look back and go, seriously, we were able to steer a car at 90 miles an hour with another car 3 feet away in the opposite direction?
That is something that always amazes me as I drive down roads where you're on the same piece of road as the car in the opposite direction. I've met quite a few strange people in my life who don't necessarily bear goodwill to all humans. And I'm amazed that no driver coming the other way has ever just swerved across and come at me.
It does have. I wrote my first successful book, Possession. That was inspired by a friend of mine's son who was driving to Paris at 2 o'clock in the morning, and a Frenchman whose wife had left him just deliberately drove the wrong way down the Paris-Lille autoroute at 2 in the morning to commit suicide, killed the son.
Oh, how awful.
It does happen. It happens much more accidentally. I mean, I go out with the traffic police fairly regularly for research for Roy Grace. And I was out with a guy in Sussex just before COVID, probably 3 years ago. In that week, he had been to 2 fatalities, 3 days apart, on a stretch of road, quite fast, 2-lane, where on both occasions the driver had veered into the path of an oncoming lorry. On both occasions, they were talking on their mobile phone.
Wow.
So if we're talking about having longer, healthier lives, it's not just a matter of fixing our biology, it's sometimes a matter of fixing our systems, fixing our technology, and making our cars maybe have more control over us rather than leaving us humans as the most buggy feature in the car.
When they did invent the car, you had to walk in front with a red flag for quite a long time. I think if the car was invented now, there would be a kind of massive hoo-ha about it. It's quite staggering. People are scared of flying. And yet, on commercial airliners, there's about 1,350 people killed a year throughout the world, and it's 1.25 million on the roads.
Road accidents are the biggest cause of death worldwide for people between 5 and 24 or something. We shouldn't end on such a gloomy note, so let's elicit something much more positive. Do you have a favourite upbeat science fiction writer?
Kurt Vonnegut.
Yes.
I just love him. He says so many great things. I think one of my favourite of his lines is simple. He says, listen, we were put on this earth to fart around, and don't let anyone tell you any different.
That's a great way to end. Well, let's hope we have many more years of farting around. Peter, thank you very much indeed for joining us on the London Futurist podcast.
Calum and David, thank you. It's been great fun.
Thank you.